back! Run! Oh God, what is that? Help us.
There is a specific, heavy kind of loneliness that only exists in a rural Nebraska cornfield at midnight. It isn't like the woods, where the trees block your view and hide secrets in the shadows. Out here, you can see for miles under the moonlight, but all you see is an endless, swaying ocean of gold that seems to breathe on its own. My name is Wyatt, and I have farmed the Stalk's End property for 20 years. It was good land, flat and fertile, but it had a strange reputation. The locals in town always looked at me funny when I told them where I lived. They asked if I ever heard the whispers in October. I laughed them off as superstitions. I was a man of science and diesel engines, not ghost stories. I stood on my porch that night, holding a mug of black coffee, looking out at the 80 acres of unharvested corn that waited for me. The banknotes were piling up on the kitchen counter behind me, bright pink notices that screamed foreclosure. Stalk's End wasn't just land. It was my bloodline, and I was bleeding out financially. The air was crisp and smelled of dry husks and impending rain. But beneath the smell of the harvest, there was something else. A faint, musky odor like wet dog and copper pennies. It hung stagnant in the humidity, raising the hair on my arms. I ignored it, blaming the neighbor's livestock. I needed to get into the field. If I didn't get this crop in before the storm, I would lose everything. I walked toward the massive shape of my combine harvester, Big Red, unaware that I was stepping into a hunting ground that hadn't been fed in a century. It was late October, the absolute peak of the harvest season. I climbed up into the cab of Big Red and fired up the massive diesel engine. The machine roared to life, shaking the ground beneath it and vibrating the soles of my boots. The cab smelled of stale grease and old tobacco smoke, a scent that had lingered since my grandfather ran this farm. I engaged the thresher, and a giant reel began to spin, hungry for the crop. I drove into the first rows, the headlights cutting through the darkness like eyes, illuminating the wall of stalks in front of me. I was tired, my bones aching from weeks of nonstop labor. The coffee in my thermos was already cold, and the AM radio was nothing but static. I just wanted to finish the South Quadrant. The first sign that something was wrong wasn't a noise. It was the combine itself. This machine was worth $500,000, fully computerized and precise down to the inch. But at 1 a.m., the GPS screen on my dashboard flickered violently. The digital map that showed my perfectly straight rows distorted, twisting the green lines into chaotic spirals like a hurricane. "Ah, piece of junk," I muttered, banging the dash with my fist. I checked the hydraulic pressure gauges, looking for a leak, but everything read normal. Then, the sensors screamed. The header obstruction alarm blared in the small cab, piercing my ears. I slammed on the brakes, and the massive machine lurched to a halt, the seatbelt digging into my chest. The reel stopped spinning. I stared out into the dark corn, confused. There was nothing visible in the intake, but the computer insisted I had hit something solid. I killed the engine, and the sudden silence was deafening. I grabbed my heavy Maglite flashlight and opened the cab door. The air outside was dead still. No crickets, no wind, just the ticking of the cooling engine and the smell of diesel fumes mixing with the dry earth. I climbed down the metal ladder, my boots crunching in the dirt. The corn was 7 feet tall, towering over me, creating a wall that felt like it was closing in. I felt small next to the towering tires of the combine, exposed in the open field. I walked to the front of the combine, shining my light into the massive razor-sharp teeth of the header. I expected to see a deer carcass or maybe a large rock that had jammed the auger. There was nothing. The blades were clean steel, gleaming in the flashlight beam. The intake was empty. "Sensor malfunction," I sighed, wiping grease on my jeans. I turned to climb back up, but something caught my eye in the standing corn just ahead of the machine. The stalks were bent. Not broken by wind, but crushed flat. A path had been flattened, about 4 feet wide, leading straight into the unharvested deep field. I shined my light down the path. It looked like a bulldozer had driven through it, but there were no tire tracks. The ground was churned up, deep divots torn into the dry soil. They looked like footprints, but the spacing was wrong. Whatever made them had a stride of 6 feet and claws that dug inches into the hard-pan clay. It looked like something heavy had dragged itself through the dirt, intent on destruction. I climbed back into the cab, deeply unsettled. I locked the door, a reflex I rarely felt the need for out here. I told myself it was just local kids messing around, or maybe a loose cow from the ranch over the ridge. I fired the engine back up and engaged the thresher. I needed to focus on the job. I made 2 more passes, the rhythmic thrum of the work lulling me back into a trance. Then, I saw it. About 50 yards ahead, sticking straight out of the corn rows, was a scarecrow. I froze. I didn't own a scarecrow. I never put one up. I slowed the machine down to a crawl, the engine idling low. It was a crude thing, a wooden cross draped in dirty, tattered flannel that looked disturbingly familiar, like an old shirt I had thrown out months ago. It swayed slightly, even though there was absolutely no wind that night. As I got closer, the powerful LED headlights illuminated it fully. It wasn't wearing flannel. It was wrapped in a bloodied, shredded deerskin that was still wet, glistening in the harsh light. The head wasn't a pumpkin or a burlap sack. It was the rotting skull of a coyote, lashed to the wood with baling twine. The eye sockets of the skull were staring right at me, empty and judging. This wasn't a decoration. It was a warning. Someone or something had taken the time to build a totem of death in the middle of my field to mark their territory, and they had done it recently. I stopped the combine again. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that matched the strobe of the warning lights. This wasn't kids. This was sick. I didn't get out this time. I felt safer inside the glass box of the cab, elevated above the corn. I grabbed the CB radio mic, my hand shaking slightly. "Otis? You awake, old man? Over." Otis was my neighbor, a Vietnam vet who lived 2 miles down the road in a trailer. He usually monitored the radio all night because he couldn't sleep, haunted by his own ghosts. Static hissed for a moment. Then a voice cut through. "I'm here, Wyatt. What's wrong? You sound shaken." "I found something in the south field. Some sick joke. A scarecrow made of bones and fresh skin. It's pointed right at the house." The line went silent for a long time. The static hissed like rain. "Wyatt," Otis said, his voice dropping an octave. "Dead serious. Listen to me carefully. Turn the machine around. Come back to the house. Do not get out of the cab for any reason. Keep the lights on." "I have to finish the harvest. It's just a prank. Probably teenagers from town." "It's a marker, Wyatt," Otis yelled, the distortion crack in his voice. "It marks the hunting ground. The tribe spoke of it. The corn wolf doesn't like the noise. It wakes up hungry. Get out of there." I ignored him. I couldn't afford to listen to an old man's war-torn paranoia. I needed the money from this crop to save the farm. I drove the combine forward, crushing the bone scarecrow under the massive rubber tires. I felt a sick satisfaction as the wood snapped and the skull was ground into dust. I thought I was the master of this land. 10 minutes later, I realized how wrong I was. To my right, parallel to the combine, something was running through the corn. The stalks were thrashing violently, whipping back and forth as if a truck were driving through them. I was moving at 4 miles per hour. The disturbance in the corn was matching my speed perfectly. I sped up to 6 miles per hour, pushing the throttle. The thrashing sped up instantly, staying right alongside the header. I slowed down. It slowed down. It wasn't running away from the machine. It was pacing me. It was watching me. The corn was too thick to see the body, but I could see the wake it left. It was huge. A deer doesn't shake the corn like that. A bear doesn't run with that kind of fluid speed. Whatever it was hunting the harvester, treating the massive machine like prey.
I turned the side floodlights on, illuminating the wall of yellow stalks. The movement stopped instantly. I stared into the corn, trying to pierce the veil of gold. "Come on," I whispered, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. "Show yourself." Suddenly, a massive shape launched itself out of the corn and onto the grain tank behind the cab. The whole combine shuddered under the impact, rocking on its suspension. The metal groaned as if a car had been dropped on it. I spun around in my seat, looking through the rear safety window. Standing on top of the grain tank, bathed in the red glow of the taillights, was a monster. It was hunched over, covered in matted, dust-colored fur that blended perfectly with the dried corn. It had the head of a wolf, but the chest and shoulders of a bodybuilder, rippling with unnatural muscle. Its eyes were glowing yellow, locked onto mine through the glass. It raised a massive clawed fist and slammed it against the safety glass. Thud! The glass didn't break, but a spiderweb crack appeared right in front of my face. It snarled, saliva dripping onto the window. It was trying to get in. I screamed and slammed the throttle forward. The sudden acceleration threw the creature off balance. It slid off the back of the slippery metal tank, claws screeching against the steel, and vanished into the darkness of the field. I didn't stop. I drove that combine like a tank, tearing through the corn, destroying my own crop, heading straight for the farmhouse. I checked the rear camera monitor. The corn behind me was parting in a V-shape, a wake of destruction closing in fast. It was chasing me. I reached the edge of the field and burst onto the gravel driveway. I didn't bother powering down the header or turning off the engine. I jumped out of the cab while it was still rolling to a stop and sprinted for the front porch. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so bad I dropped them on the mat. I could hear heavy, rhythmic breathing coming from the darkness of the driveway. Huff, huff, huff. It was close, the sound wet and guttural. I snatched the keys, kicked the door open, fell inside, and deadbolted it. I slid down to the floor, gasping for air, clutching my chest. I was safe, or so I thought. The house suddenly felt very thin, like it was made of paper. I grabbed my shotgun from the gun cabinet, a 12-gauge pump action that had belonged to my father. I loaded it with deer slugs, my fingers fumbling with the plastic shells, dropping one on the floor. I turned off all the lights in the house and peeked through the blinds of the living room window. The yard light was buzzing, casting a sickly yellow glow over the driveway and the idling combine. Standing right under the light, looking at the house, was the creature. It was fully 7 feet tall. It stood on 2 legs, its knees bent backward like a canine. Its fur was the exact color of dry corn husks, perfect camouflage for this environment. It wasn't attacking blindly. It was testing the perimeter. It walked around my truck, sniffing the tires. Then it walked to the porch steps. It placed one massive foot on the wood. The step creaked under its weight. It looked up at the window where I was hiding. It knew I was watching. It grinned, revealing a maw of yellow teeth. It wasn't an animal grin. It was a cruel, intelligent expression of dominance. It was telling me that this wasn't my farm anymore. It belonged to the harvest now. My cell phone buzzed in my pocket, making me jump out of my skin. It was Otis. I answered, pressing the phone to my ear. "I saw the lights, Wyatt," Otis whispered. "I saw you run from the field. It's outside, isn't it? I can see its shadow from my window." "Yes," I breathed, keeping my eyes on the monster in the yard. "Otis, what is it? It looks like a wolf, but it walks like a man. It's taunting me." "It's the corn wolf," Otis said. "The old farmers knew about it. The tribes knew about it. It sleeps in the soil for cycles, hibernating deep underground. Then it wakes up for the harvest. It thinks you stealing his food." "My food? I planted this," I hissed. "I worked this land for 20 years. "It doesn't care about the corn, Wyatt," Otis said grimly. "The corn attracts the deer attract the wolf. You clearing the field takes away its cover. You're exposing its hunting ground. It wants you to stop. It wants the land back. It's ancient, Wyatt. It doesn't understand deeds or titles. It only understands blood." As Otis spoke, the lights in the house flickered and died. The yard light outside extinguished. Pitch blackness swallowed the farm. "Otis? Otis!" I yelled into the phone. The line was dead. The cell tower must have been powered by the same grid, or the creature had done something to the lines. It had cut the power. It knew how to isolate its prey. I was alone in the dark. The silence of the house was suffocating. Then I heard the sound of glass shattering in the kitchen at the back of the house. I froze. It hadn't stayed on the porch. It had circled around to the back while I was on the phone. It was testing the weak points. I racked the shotgun. Chuck, chuck. The sound echoed in the silent house. I moved slowly down the hallway, guiding myself by memory. The floorboards creaked under my boots. The kitchen door was closed. I could hear heavy, wet footsteps on the linoleum on the other side. Click, clack, click, clack. It was the sound of hard claws tapping on tile. It was inside. I kicked the kitchen door open and simultaneously clicked on my tactical light attached to the shotgun. The beam cut through the dark. The creature was standing by the refrigerator. It had ripped the heavy door off its hinges like it was made of cardboard and was eating raw hamburger meat from the shelf. It stopped and looked at me, blood and plastic wrap dripping from its snout. It didn't look scared. It looked annoyed, like I had interrupted a meal. I didn't hesitate. I pulled the trigger. Boom! The slug hit it square in the shoulder. The impact threw it back into the cabinets, shattering dishes and splintering wood. It roared, a sound that shook the walls and vibrated in my teeth, and scrambled out the broken window it had entered through. I ran to the window and fired another shot into the dark yard. I heard a yelp, then silence. I barricaded the window with the heavy oak kitchen table, dragging it across the floor. I was shaking uncontrollably. I had shot it, but I knew I hadn't killed it. I had just made it angry. I retreated to the basement. It was the only room in the house with no large windows and heavy concrete walls. I locked the thick door at the top of the stairs and pushed a bookshelf against it for good measure. I sat on the cold concrete floor in the dark with my shotgun across my lap, listening to the house settle above me. For an hour, there was absolute silence. Then I heard scratching. Not on the door upstairs, scratching on the small ground-level window well in the basement corner. I shined my light. A furry hand was clearing away the dirt and leaves from the glass. It was digging its way down. It knew exactly where I was. It could smell me through the walls. It wasn't just a brute. It was a tactician. It knew the basement was a trap, and it was coming to flush me out. I smashed the glass with the butt of my gun and poked the barrel out. "Get back!" I screamed, my voice echoing in the small space. I didn't fire. I didn't want to waste the ammo on a blind shot. The hand withdrew from the window well. Then a voice drifted down through the broken glass. "Wyatt!" It wasn't a human voice. It was raspy, deep, and sounded like gravel grinding together. It was mimicking me. It was using my own name, copying the exact inflection Otis used on the radio earlier. "Wyatt, come out!" My blood ran cold. It wasn't just a beast. It was a mimic. It was intelligent enough to learn speech. It was trying to lure me out of my fortress. "Go to hell!" I yelled, my voice cracking. "Hell," the voice repeated, testing the word on its tongue. Then it laughed, a dry hacking sound like a coyote choking. "Hungry," it whispered. It wasn't just mimicking. It was communicating. It was playing with its food before the kill. It wanted me to know that nowhere was safe. I didn't sleep. I sat there with my gun pointed at the window until the sun came up. The light filtered through the dirty glass, gray and weak. I climbed the stairs and pushed the bookshelf away. The house was trashed. Furniture was upturned. Walls were gouged with claw marks, and the smell of wet dog was everywhere. It had spent the night destroying my home while I hid, tearing apart everything I owned just to terrorize me. I walked out to the porch. The combine was still parked in the driveway, the driver's door open. I needed to leave. I needed to get to town and bring back the sheriff and a SWAT team. I ran to my pickup truck. The tires were shredded. Huge claw marks had ripped the heavy-duty rubber to ribbons. It had disabled my vehicle. It didn't want me to leave. It wanted to finish the game tonight. I was stranded on my own farm, miles from help, with a monster that held a grudge. The isolation of the Nebraska plains, usually so peaceful, now felt like a prison cell.
I couldn't stay in the house. It was a trap with too many entrances. I needed a fortress that was impenetrable. I looked at the massive metal grain silo near the barn. It was 40 feet tall, made of smooth galvanized steel, with a single ladder and a lock and hatch at the top. It was filled with corn from the previous week's harvest. If I could get to the top of the silo, I would have the high ground. I could see everything coming for miles,
and it couldn't tear through steel walls. But the silo was 50 yards away, across the open yard. The cornfield started just beyond it. I grabbed a box of ammo and a bottle of water. I stood by the door, trying to summon the courage. I took a deep breath. 1, 2, 3, go! I sprinted across the gravel, my boots pounding the ground, waiting for the impact of teeth and claws. I was halfway to the silo when the corn exploded. It didn't come from the field. It came from under the porch. It had dug a den right under my feet while I was hiding in the basement. The creature burst out, dirt flying. It cut off my path to the silo. I skidded to a stop in the gravel, dust billowing around me. It stood between me and safety, growling low. It looked different in the daylight. Its fur was matted with dried blood from a gunshot wound the night before. Its shoulder was a mess of raw meat. It was hurt, and that made it more dangerous. It was desperate. It lunged at me. I fired from the hip. The shot went wide, hitting the dirt. I pumped the gun. Clip! Jammed. A shell had stuck in the chamber. No! I screamed, staring at the monster midair. I fumbled with the slide, but my sweaty hand slipped. It was over. The creature leaped at me, claws extended. I braced for death, closing my eyes. Crack! A rifle shot rang out from the road. The creature jerked midair, hit by a high-caliber round. It spun around and landed on its side in the dirt. I looked toward the road. Otis was standing by his old Ford truck, resting a sniper rifle on the hood. He had come for me. The old man hadn't abandoned me. "Run, boy!" Otis yelled. "Don't look back!" I dropped the jammed shotgun and sprinted for the silo. The creature was already scrambling back up, snarling at Otis. It was distracted. I hit the ladder and started climbing. I heard the creature roar and turn back toward me. I scrambled up the metal rungs, my boots slipping. I heard the clang of claws hitting the metal below me. It was climbing the ladder. I didn't look down. I just climbed. I could feel the vibration of the creature climbing the ladder behind me. It was fast, pulling itself up rung by rung with terrifying strength. I could hear its breath, wet and ragged, getting closer. I reached the top platform, 40 feet in the air. I grabbed the hatch handle and threw it open. I dove inside onto the pile of corn and slammed the hatch shut. I spun the locking wheel just as a massive impact hit the lid. Boom! The creature was on the roof of the silo. It hammered on the steel hatch, screaming in rage. I was trapped inside a metal drum, but I was safe for the moment. The smell of corn dust choked me. "Otis!" I yelled, though I knew he couldn't hear me through the steel. I crawled to the edge of the silo roof vent and peeked out through the slats to see the yard below. Below, Otis was driving his truck into the yard. He was honking the horn, trying to draw the creature down from the silo. The creature stopped banging on the hatch. It looked down at the truck. It realized the old man was the bigger threat. It leaped. I watched in horror as the creature jumped 40 feet from the silo roof. It landed on the hood of Otis's truck, crushing the metal engine block. The suspension collapsed. Otis fired through the windshield, but the creature punched through the glass and dragged the old man out of the cab. "Otis!" I screamed, helpless. Otis didn't scream. He looked up at the silo, catching my eye for a split second. Then he pulled a pin on a grenade he had strapped to his tactical vest. The crazy old vet had come prepared to die. He grinned, spitting blood at the monster. Boom! The explosion rocked the silo. A fireball engulfed the truck and the creature. Debris flew everywhere. I covered my head as shrapnel pinged off the silo walls like hail. When the smoke cleared, the truck was a burning wreck. Otis was gone. The creature was gone. I waited for 10 minutes. Silence. I opened the hatch slowly. The yard was a crater. I climbed down the ladder, my legs trembling. I walked to the burning truck. There was nothing left of Otis but scorched metal and a few scraps of clothes. But there was no sign of the creature's body. Then I saw the trail. A thick trail of black blood leading away from the blast, dragging into the cornfield. It had survived a grenade. It was broken, bleeding out, but it was crawling back to his lair to heal. I realized then that I couldn't kill it with guns. I couldn't kill it with bombs. It was part of the land, tough as the earth itself. But I had one weapon left, the big red, the combine. It was still running in the field where I left it. No, I drove it to the house. It was parked right there, untouched by the explosion. I climbed into the cab. I fired it up. The massive diesel engine roared. I engaged the header. The razor-sharp blades began to spin, blurring into a deadly vortex. I followed the blood trail into the corn. I drove the combine into the field. I was going to finish the harvest. I wasn't farming corn anymore. I was farming vengeance. The machine felt like an extension of my own rage. I tracked the blood for a mile deep into the section. The corn was thick, but the combine chewed through it effortlessly. I couldn't see the creature, but I knew it was hurting. It was slow. The trail was getting wider, the blood darker. Then I saw it. It was lying in a clearing of crushed stalks, licking its wounds. It looked up as the massive machine approached. Its eyes were dim, but still full of hate. It tried to stand, but its legs collapsed. It was too weak to run. I didn't slow down. I throttled up. The combine roared. The creature snarled and tried to crawl away. It was too late. The header teeth grabbed it. There was a sickening crunch, a spray of red mist that covered the windshield, and a mechanical grind as the thresher processed the beast. The machine bogged down for a second, groaned, then cleared. I had harvested the monster. I sat in the cab for a long time, listening to the machine idle. It was over. The sun was setting over the field, turning the corn a blood-red color. I drove back to the house. I called the sheriff. I told him Otis had an accident with a propane tank on his truck. I didn't mention the wolf. They found pieces of Otis. They found strange, unidentifiable meat in the combine's hopper, mixed with the corn. I told them I hit a deer during the harvest. They believed me, because no one wants to believe in monsters. I finished the harvest that week. I worked every night, never turning off the lights, watching the tree line. The creature didn't return, but the silence of the farm wasn't peaceful anymore. It was empty. The soul of the place was gone, ground up in the machinery. Winter came. The snow covered the scorched spot in the yard where Otis died. I sold the farm in the spring. I couldn't stay there. I moved to the city, got a job in a factory. I thought I was safe. I thought I had left the curse behind in the dirt. But yesterday, I got a package in the mail. There was no return address. Inside was a single ear of corn. The kernels weren't yellow. They were black, and wrapped around the cob was a lock of coarse, dust-colored fur. I remembered what Otis said. It sleeps in the soil for cycles. I didn't kill it. I ran it through the combine and scattered its essence, its DNA, across 80 acres of fertile soil. I replanted it. Next year, the harvest won't be corn. It'll be a pack, and I know exactly where they'll come looking for the farmer who planted them.